As a small fry con man once said, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world that he didn't exist. And during the computer boom of the early 2000s, thousands of people under his spell flocked to Apple stores across the world to buy a Mac. Because, well, Macs don't get viruses. I mean, even Apple said so themselves in their commercials. And for a while, it was even true. Developers had nothing to gain by creating malicious code for OS X's much more obscure platform. Mac users had nothing to worry about. Until they received a private message on February 13th, 2006. Word was already circulating the net through communities like Mac Rumors that Apple was working on a new version of their operating system called Mac OS X Leopard, but not a whole lot was known about it, keeping the company's loyal fanbase under great suspense. So when they saw a file that supposedly contained leaked images of the OS, their suspense grew even further. But their blind perception of Mac's safety didn't give them any second thoughts about the consequences, as simply opening the message brought the user into a world of trouble. This new computer worm was known as the Oompa Loompa virus, or Leap.A, and it was spreading across multiple local area networks using Apple's most popular instant messaging system, iChat. And the naivety of many inexperienced Mac users who paid almost no regard to safety allowed the virus to get around as much as it did, infecting multiple machines at once, and even leaving some applications on the network unusable. But how did this all even happen? What caused one of the most highly respected platforms of PC to become more of the same pretty much overnight? And how was the worm able to take one of the most secure and stable operating systems and change all its configurations with such great ease? And most importantly, how did so many people still not know any better? Creating a computer virus is just plain wrong, but you know what's plain right? Of course I'm talking about War Thunder, the sponsor of this video. Get it? Because War Thunder's a plane game. Anyway, have you ever dreamed of being a pilot? Well, I can't help you. Go to pilot school. But if you just want to play a really fun video game, well, War Thunder is at your service. And it's a military vehicle combat online game. And it's completely free for PC, Xbox Series X and S, and PlayStation 5. Now I know it's the last few weeks of summer and all the cool kids are busy playing jacks down at the soda fountain and flying kites, but it's quite hot out, so why not pretend you're outside and like fly airplanes and stuff? It doesn't have to be an airplane, it can also be a tank or a ship, whatever you want. War Thunder is also fully cross-platform, so if you have a PlayStation and your friend has an Xbox, well, don't fret, they've got you covered. And you don't have to buy it, you can just download it. War Thunder is cool because it is actually historically accurate to the vehicles and aircraft that existed as far back as the 1920s, and you can use them to play some pretty intense PvP full-scale missions. And you don't have to play alone either. There's over 50 million people that already play the game, and the graphics are stunning. Now I've always been a sucker for world history, so the game really felt immersive, and I actually had a lot of fun playing it. And you can too by using my link to download War Thunder. That way you can get the exclusive bonus of a premium plane, tank, and ship, plus a 7-day account boost. And if you already have an account, you can still use it. I was trying to think of some good airplane jokes to go with this part of the sponsor, but they would just go over your head. Anyway, go ahead and check out War Thunder, and I will see you in battle. The Oompa Loompa virus really is just history repeating itself in many ways. The lessons we all learned from worms like Melissa and the love letter worm seem to completely go out the window when it entered the picture, right? Well, yes and no. The circumstances behind Oompa Loompa enabled users to give it more of the benefit of the doubt, and it was all thanks to brilliant marketing, false preconceived notions of Apple products, and of course the inevitable gullibility of the general public. Throughout the 2000s, Apple's big selling point was that their computers were better than the competing Windows PC brands of the time. The colloquial Mac versus PC debate has been around really since the Macintosh was released in 1984, but it saw a big revival at the end of the 90s after Steve Jobs returned as Apple's CEO, and their entire marketing strategy changed. It wasn't about why you should buy a Mac, but instead why you should buy a Mac instead of a PC. Reasons including that it came with more software right out of the box, only required one cord to power up, and that it didn't get any viruses. And this was actually technically true, to an extent, because of a concept called security through obscurity. At around this time, Mac OS X's market share was very small in comparison to Windows. Apple users were really just a small crowd with a very loud voice, so you might think that there were a lot of Mac users out there. But in reality, there wasn't even enough for malicious developers to even create malware for the platform. They had nothing to gain from it. Of course, Mac viruses did exist, but they weren't nearly significant or damaging enough to even make a blip on the map. And with Apple sending out this message for such a long time, it started to become common knowledge among people who did or were considering doing the switch over to their products. Oompa Loompa was when that changed. It wasn't that the idea of getting a suspicious message from a friend on your computer was some completely foreign concept, but that was just a Windows thing. They didn't think it was necessary to have second thoughts or be suspicious because Macs don't get viruses. Of course, not everyone thought this way, and this was just part of it. Otherwise, the virus wouldn't have been able to spread in the first place, because you do have to take into account just the general ignorance of everyday online users. You must remember that the average person really is more gullible than you might think. Even if the most devastating virus you could think of presented itself through the form of a worm, and people issued all kinds of PSAs and warnings about it, there would still be those select people who would still fall for it. You also had those people who were anticipating more information about OS X Leopard, and let their ambition take over their safety instincts. But did the developer of the Oompa Loompa virus have all those things in mind when creating it? Unfortunately, that is a question we cannot answer because, well, we have no idea who created the worm or what its origins even are. It is still a mystery today, though the most likely case is that it originated from a rapid share link dated February 10th that was posted on a series of Apple-related forums, but would really start to gain recognition just 3 days later in a thread on the site Mac Rumors, when a user named Last Hope posted about supposed screenshots of OS X Leopard. Other users would quickly figure out what it truly was and respond with great animosity. This would be the only time Last Hope would ever post or even log in. Whether or not all these submissions were from the same person is unknown. But these points of origin would make sense based on the nature of how the worm spreads in the first place. So what did the Oompa Loompa doopity do? So it actually behaves in a way very similar to the previous worms like Melissa and I Love You, except one crucial difference. Oompa Loompa didn't spread through the internet. It spread through local area networks, or intranets, networks that are private and typically limited to only one area. An example of this would be the computer lab at a school, or your local library's computers, printers, that sort of thing. So if the worm were to replicate itself across multiple machines, it can only do so within the limits of that network. In that case, the Mac Rumors theory would likely make the most sense, as it would describe how the worm was able to affect multiple LANs and not just one. Instead of using Microsoft Outlook, it used iChat, essentially Mac's version of AOL Instant Messenger, and it spread using the Bonjour protocol, which is what makes LAN connections through Apple devices possible. And that's where it would all start. A Mac user would get a text message from someone they know within their iChat Bonjour list. Just like with all computer worms, it needs a hook, something to get the user to activate it in the first place. In this case, it is a message claiming to have screenshots of the upcoming Mac OS X Leopard, containing the file latestpics.jpg. TGZ is the suffix used for tar archive files, a compressed version of one or multiple files, similar to a zip file. After it's opened, you are presented with the latest pics. The file looks very convincing at first, but don't be fooled. Rather than being your traditional JPEG, it is actually a Unix executable script that surreptitiously sports the Mac's default image icon. Because Macs in 2006 typically hid file extensions like JPEG by default, the person looking at it wouldn't be all that skeptical that this was in fact an image, until they opened it. After that, it was too late, as a terminal window would come up, and now, just like a typical worm, suddenly everyone in the victim's iChat bonjour list has also been sent the worm, with it looking like the file is being sent from the victim. It does this by creating a copy of the document and placing it in your temp directory, which it uses to send out to everybody. Lastly, it would then use Mac OS X's Spotlight feature to find your 4 most recently used Cocoa developed applications and then infect them by adding extended attributes with the name Oompa and the value Loompa, which is where the name of the worm comes from. As a result, a lot of people were no longer able to open these kinds of apps. They were now corrupt, leaving users no choice but to do a full reinstall. Considering that this worm didn't even transmit itself across the internet, you might think that its severity wasn't that bad and it was mostly all just talk. And you would be right. A lot of the articles covering the story were a bit sensationalist, claiming that anyone who owned iChat was in danger. But as we discussed with its use of bonjour, it was a bit more complicated than that. Many people did report having their programs be destroyed, but many others also didn't, and there was a reason for this. The worm only infected Cocoa applications manually installed and owned by the user, so click and drag applications. So the programs that came with the Mac weren't affected. On top of that, you had to be logged into the administrator account, or at least be given admin privileges, which in that case, you would have to type in a password to even open the file. But given that typing your password to install applications is a very common practice on Mac OS X, there is a good chance that a person may have typed in their password to open the file without questioning anything. They were so used to it. This is a big reason why the file was able to configure such a robust operating system so easily, because the user would flat out just give it permission. Overall, the worm was pretty much benign unless under very specific circumstances. Your 85-year-old grandmother with an iChat account was probably fine, but a system administrator working for a large firm that heavily relies on manually installed Cocoa programs, yeah, they were pretty much doomed. The virus was first discovered as a confirmed threat by one of Apple's security firms Intego, and it was eventually contained by spreading the word about its deceiving nature. Thankfully, the level at which the worm spread wasn't unparalleled like with Melissa or the Love Letter, but it was enough to cause concern, and emphasize that this was indeed the end of an era for the Mac. Well, sort of, because Apple would continue marketing the Mac as a virus-immune computer despite all this. It didn't matter. But still, for many people, this worm took away that facade. It was a sign that the Mac was no longer really that special. It wasn't hipster to own one anymore. Its fan base was growing, and it was slowly becoming just more of the same. The Oompa Loompa worm led by example, and many other malicious programs for the Mac would follow. It was one of many signs that Apple was so different from what it was 10 years prior. It was only growing as a company, and there was so much more to come. All this talking is making me feel a bit adventurous. Let's take a trip back to 2006 and try this virus out for ourselves. Now, I am going to be doing something quite different. After hours and hours of deep digging and research, it appears that this virus does not exist anymore. It has pretty much been obliterated from the internet and is more or less lost media. But thanks to the bountiful information and extremely detailed eyewitness accounts on it that can easily be found online, I was able to do a recreation of it, and it's pretty dang close to the real thing. Now, I'm not much of a programmer, but I was able to figure this out in my own way. Of course, do not try this at home, and with that said, let's begin. Now remember, this virus only affects Cocoa applications, so I have gone ahead and put together a basic Cocoa application of my own. We'll go ahead and close that and open my iChat. This is my bonjour list, aka all of my people connected to my local network, and I should be getting a message from them any minute. Ah, there it is. latestpics.jpg. Are these those images of Mac OS X Leopard I've been hearing about? Let's go ahead and find out. Here is our file. Now let's open it. Now look at how convincing that is. But if we select Get Info, all the smoke and mirrors start to manifest. That is not an image file by any means. It is a wolf in sheep's clothing, or a Unix executable file in JPEG clothing. Because this is a worm that entices people, it is classified as a Trojan horse, programs that pretend to be safe, but aren't. Now let's activate it. Some kind of process has now been executed on my computer, and now it is very apparent that this is not a leaked image of the next Mac OS. Now all my contacts on my iChat Bonjour list have been sent a copy of this file, and this time it appears as if it's coming from me. It was able to do this from the duplicate it installed on my computer. If we go to our temp folder, we can see that it's clearly there. Because this virus takes advantage of Mac OS X Tiger's Spotlight feature to find the most recently used Cocoa programs, it is able to affect them directly. If I go back to my program, it's not opening. Same goes for my other programs, which I've downloaded myself. Looks like I will have to reinstall these. Overall, not very harmful, but led the way for much worse to come for the Mac. One small step for PC, one giant Leap.A for OS X. Don't forget to check out War Thunder by using my link in the description below. That way you can have 7 days of just plain fun. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and click the notification bell so that you never miss a future video.